Alright, thank you very much. Hello everybody, it's your good friend Pozzible here, and I'm back in action looking at another forgotten classic. One of those movies that was played a long time ago. Maybe it did well, maybe it didn't do well, but nowadays it has aged well. And almost to perfection. I mean, it's one of those great movies that when you look back at it, you say, wow, we could really make movies back then. And of course, I'm going back to 1984 to the classic movie Cloak and Dagger. You know, fresh off of his success with E.T., Henry Thomas had to get into his next movie, and one of his next movies was Cloak and Dagger. This movie about Davy Osborne, a kid who just lost his mom recently. His dad is in the Air Force and has to work a lot of hours, and you can tell it's very hard on them. And you know, this was an amazing part about the way movies were done. They didn't overdo it. You got that they were really broken up inside, and had trouble communicating with each other. You know, so the father loses himself in his work. Davy, being a young boy, loses himself in video games and RPG games, hanging out with his friends. One of the games he likes to play in both video games and no, he hasn't even played the game. An RPG game called Cloak and Dagger, where he plays Jack Flack, who becomes his imaginary friend that you'll see later on. But in the meantime, you have to understand that Cloak and Dagger is about the video game itself. The video game, an Atari game, is one where if you play it, you know, and you gotta love these 80s graphics. Don't you? Just gotta love the 80s graphics. That was pretty high graphics back in the day. But anyway, you had to play the game. Oh, and here we go again. The controller. The awesome 80s controller. Now, this was actually an advanced model, believe it or not. The other one was a square box, and you had one button on one side and you had the controller on the other. But it was just one button and everything. High technology back in those days. But anyway, you play the game, and once you score a certain point, you get into some secrets of the American government. Another interesting thing. Even though Cloak and Dagger, the movie, was supposed to release Cloak and Dagger, the video game, then referred to as Agent X, but they did release a limited release of Cloak and Dagger, the video game. Here's the funny part, okay? This particular movie has the first Easter egg in a video game in it. Okay, now I don't know if Easter eggs were in here before. I doubt it. I don't think they were. Easter eggs really came around in the 90s and the early 2000s, but. You know, 1984, this is the first idea of an Easter egg right here. So you got this game where if you reach a certain point, you can download secret government secrets and classified government secrets. And it's hilarious to think that this was one of the first Easter eggs that just hit me just now. But anyway, the point is, and this is the only game that can do this, all right, which doesn't make really much sense to me, considering the fact that these games really barely had the memories for their own games, and all you could do is play the game. You really couldn't, you know, save your game back in those days. It wouldn't be until like Nintendo that you could actually save the information, save where you played. Okay, back in these days, once you started playing, you had to start with level 1 if you turn off the power because it didn't save your information or anything. But that's the premise of the game. The video games has secret documents on it that some spies are trying to get. The Cloak and Dagger, the game, has become Cloak and Dagger for real. And by the way, this is what the game looked like. If it doesn't make sense what kind of game this was, think of Robotron. Okay, it was basically the same thing. You were Jack Flack. Or, yeah, Jack Flack, you ran into the middle of the room. You had to shoot everybody before you could go to the next room. Each time you collected secrets. Collect enough secrets, you get into the real secrets in this particular model and everything. And it's up to Danny to prevent these guys from getting the game. Now, believe it or not, I don't know if Danny really understands the magnitude of what's happening to him. I do believe that if they really, you know, weren't shooting the guy, he might have just given it to him. Davy. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm calling him Danny. Davy is more afraid for his life than anything else. And these guys come after him. They don't hold back. You know, they're really kind of mean, dastardly, and that's what makes this movie so good. You know, but Davy's not alone. He's got his friends. He's got his imaginary friend, Jack Flack, played also by Dabney Coleman. This was one of the best dual actings that I've ever seen. You know, Dabney Coleman was awesome as both the father who was broken up and the imaginary best friend. Now, I struggle with that word because this movie confuses us sometimes. It likes to play with us. At times, you get that he's the imaginary best friend. However, you also get an idea that he's more like an invisible friend, because he helps Davy in ways that defy imagination, defy explanation. And there's one at the end that just really goes over the top. Back in those days, it would have been considered nonsensical. Today, it's just considered fun. But make sure there is no mistake here. The movie Cloak and Dagger is not all about fun. You really get a sense that Davy is in real danger. Okay, and that was the real heart of it. This is a cat and mouse game. He's on the run, killers are after him, he doesn't know who to trust or what to do, so he relies on his friend to help guide him. Of course, that's probably just his own common sense talking to him in that, but the one part that got me the most was when his friend picked Davy's in a trunk with a dead body, and the dead body falls on top of him, and he needs to push that body up, but he can't. So his friend helps him push a dead body off of him. I don't know about you, but my imaginary friends never pushed a dead body off of me. Maybe that's just me, though. Anyway, the point is, Cloak and Dagger is one of those great spy intrigue thrillers that was made back in the 80s. It had a little bit of gadget to it, had a little bit of spy motifs going on, but for the most part, he had those walkie-talkies. And the villains, very dastardly, very much something to watch out for. You know, they weren't like the villains you see nowadays, where they're stupid, where they're goofy, where they're overacting or something. These guys were stone-cold killers. And that's what made this movie great, was the fact that they were able to bring in some fantasy into some realism and make it just an incredible story. This is a movie, like I've said with other movies where the people should remake them. You do not remake Cloak and Dagger. First off, Cloak and Dagger relied on the 80s 80s paranoia during that time period of the Russians, you know, us versus the Russians and stuff like that. So secrets and people exchanging secrets was very big back in those days. The 80s was when it all came down, but before the 80s brought it down, they had these kind of movies where secrets were very important, where spies were practically everywhere, and you didn't know who to trust. And his friend, you know, the lines his friend had were just awesome, and the way he helps out and the way he, you know, just banters is actually pretty funny, you know. But you could not really remake this movie, and you shouldn't, you know. Cloak and Dagger is so good on its own. And don't get me wrong, it's a remake of itself. Older movie called The Window, where a young boy witnesses a murder. So similar, but still different. This movie is one you have to watch on its own and appreciate on its own. I hope you guys will enjoy it. I hope I know I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was a really good movie. I think you'll enjoy it too. All right, guys, that's it for me today. We'll see you at the theaters.